Peace, what's happening? I'm Stacy Patrice. Welcome back to my channel. Wanted to leave a heartfelt message today regarding my astrological practice. You all have been showing so much love and commenting and DMing and sending me messages to my website regarding what I've shared here. And I just want to soften the playing field and talk to you a bit about why I practice this astrology the way that I do. Like, what is my relationship to astrology and why do I think it's important? So, one of the first things that I realized very early on is that my connection to astrology was not one that I sought out, but one that my soul sought out. And my dad being the first astrologer I ever encountered or met in drawing my natal chart by hand based on um, my birth time and being able to chart those placements from his deep, intense study was truly a treat that I found to be quite mystical and mysterious at the time because I was a teenager. But I didn't realize until years later just how special that is. I still am not in a position where I've studied strong enough to draw someone's birth chart off the top of my head. However, I felt that this connection to astrology was forged at that time. And whether I wanted to or not, astrology was going to be a tool that would be with me for the rest of my life. Now, one of the things that's important to understand is that even though I started with tropical astrology, and even though Vedic astrology, sidereal astrology would come so much later. The point of the matter is that my brain and my mind and my spirit were already connected to the understanding of why astrology is a wonderful tool and what I call a life skill. Astrology is a life skill because throughout your life, there is a relationship to nature. There is a relationship to the cosmos because we are not sitting somewhere looking at the cosmos in a distance in awe, like, wow, the cosmos are over there. We are in the cosmos. We are a part of the cosmos. And our position on this place that we call Earth is using this as a vantage point to look at all that is happening around us. And using this vantage point means that, yeah, we are not static. We are moving. We are, in constant motion, but it's so gradual and so subtle that most of us would think we are sitting still. I'm not talking about people, not having had, science classes and, social studies and all this stuff. I'm not saying that. I'm simply saying that from our perspective and our human bodies, as we are sitting still and as we are called to stillness over and over and over again, it would be challenging to prove just through what you feel in your body for most people that we are constantly in motion. So, my vantage point of astrology was always from this place of the more that I contemplate, the stiller that I am, the more that I am curious and follow those curiosities and learn about them, the more that I start to become one with what's happening around me. I start to become like what's happening around me. I'm reflected in what's happening around me. And I don't mean this from some egocentric place. I mean this from true oneness, oneness that allows you to be because of what is. You are also what is. So, whatever it is that's happening around you is also happening within you. That is truly my belief, and I didn't come up with that. That is just truly one of those philosophies that I resonate with. So, knowing myself as a deeply inner person. Now, I am an extrovert, but I am a deeply inner person. So my extroversion comes from what I learn from within. In other words, if I'm not studying what I'm feeling, what's going on with me, then all of that expression, all of that conversation, all of those things don't come forward in the way that they should because I have not looked at the foundational relationship. The foundational relationship in the way that most of us understand it and can tangibly get information about is with our physical bodies within ourselves. So although my soul is constantly creating things that I'm animating, I am not in shade of what it is that's happening with my physical body. I'm connected and I'm embodied. And that embodiment gives me lots of data, lots of information. So how does this relate to astrology? Well, in general, this relates to astrology because the way you approach astrology is going to make the difference between how you help others and what you help others to see. In my estimation, there are two ways to approach astrology. One approach is that of a person who is seeking um, connection and sometimes explanation of what it is that they're feeling. So, in other words, the way that astrology is set up, you can have experiences, and those experiences can be versed through the language of astrology. It doesn't mean that that's all that those experiences are. That means there is definition of what those experiences are and what might be the cause of what those experiences are through astrology. So, on the first level, think of a person who's a designer. And a designer is constantly looking for ways to improve upon what is there. A designer is imagining what is missing and what needs to be brought to life. A designer is also someone who has a creative edge in how they are interpreting life and information, sometimes mystically, sometimes just, in the most joyous, expressive ways. And so that is the approach of how I look at astrology. I look at astrology as a designer. There is a design that I already have. There's a design that was coded or encoded in the sky at the time that I was born, just like it is for you. And me looking at that configuration is like looking at a geometrical code. And that geometric code is going to give me information based on the studies and the relationships that have been written for ever about these relationships and these meanings. And as a person who is constantly intuiting things and feeling things and sensing things, not to get into the 16 personalities of Myers-Briggs, but there are constantly things that I'm feeling and sensing and perceiving and intuiting. And these capabilities and characteristics are definitely unique to how I see myself, understand myself, and how I interpret the world around me. So, as a person who's connected to nature, and as a person who has imaginative and creative ability and flexes it at all times, and by flex, I just mean utilizes it, and as a person who feels deeply connected and embodied, the way that I would approach astrology would be from that space. It would be from the space of an architect or a designer, a person who is saying, okay, now that I know this element, this element, this element, I have this mastery in these areas. These are the things that I've experienced. Relate that back to what these words and what these things mean now, because I have one language for it. It's an inner language. Give me the outer language for it. Help me understand it so that I can see it, sense it, spot it, and watch the pattern of it in all things in life. And that's literally how I approach astrology. So, astrology for me is foundational. It is about getting that first relationship so clear, so tight, so mastered. And it is about understanding it from the sense of possibility of all there is. Like, yes, there is this encoding, but it's also like this mysteriousness of cracking this code, of understanding this code, of translating this code. That is how I see it. And that is my relationship to astrology. It is about intuiting, drawing, and translating the code. And that is how I teach it. That's how I've consulted it. That's how I've utilized it in my personal self-study and practice. It is about knowing your code. Okay. Now, another way to utilize astrology builds on this first foundational way that I've described. And that other way to use astrology is very much about prediction and forecasting. It is more technical in nature. It is more mathematical in certain ways in nature because it requires precision. And that precision requires very, very keen insight, instinct, study, mastery, development, and a clear channel to bias and distraction. And that is why that is not the way that I approach astrology. I am very clear that many astrologers implant personal, like their own personal stuff that's going on with them and deposit it on people when they are doing predictive and forecasting based astrology. I know some of you out there have experienced this. It is almost as if some people who do this don't understand that how their word is used is impactful and can create further bad karmas, not just on others, but then return to themselves for even speaking recklessly in that way. They are playing a position that 9 times out of 10 takes so much more mastery than what it is that is being discussed. And the reason that I am saying this so specifically is because I have a ton of respect for astrologers and a ton of respect for people who have studied and studied and studied and have dedicated their lives to the insights that you and I utilize and learn from at all times. But a lot of people never got the embodiment part. And that is the distinction for me. Did they ever get the embodiment part, or did they just pick up the books and start studying? Did they just get really technical, really mental, and then make a 2 + 2 = 4 formula, therefore it must be? And in my estimation, that is not my job to predict or forecast what your life will do for you. That is never going to be my job. I believe in free will too much for that to be my job. Now, does that mean that there is no predictive quality to astrology? Of course there is. Of course there is. This is how most people use it. Hear me clearly, though. Utilize that after the foundation is set. And so many people have not set that foundation to the level where they can be a clear channel in their prediction. Do you understand what I mean? Do you understand what I mean? Like, do you feel what I'm saying? Because a lot of times it is that searching within and is that listening to the inner language that creates the predictions, that is able to see what is happening. But that can also happen without astrology. That can also happen. It's called insight. It's insight, but it's also wisdom, and it's also experience and knowing what's happening in your inner architecture before you start designing, right? So it is the first step. It's just like in yoga, I tell my students all the time, have a personal practice, then come into community with your practice. Please do not just be in community with your practice. You must have your own personal practice first and foremost. It is the most important practice. Anything you teach, anything you offer to others should be from your own space of practice and wisdom first. Without that, you are either reading and processing and just sharing it out, or you are putting yourself in a space of speaking before true wisdom. And true wisdom is really what astrology is about. It's a very, very deeply entrenched, wise system. So my practice and goal of sharing astrology with you here and anywhere else is not to say that I cannot look at prediction, but there are so many checks and balances that have to be in order, in place. And then also the great responsibility and integrity of reading for other people is a spiritual act. And I just want to say that because there are so many people that approach it as if it is purely a technical and mental act. And this is why a pop astrology society can be something that is less valuable than what it purports. So I am saying that from the standpoint of whatever astrology you practice, whatever anything you practice, when you are divining, it is what that word means. Divining means that you are involving the highest qualities of existence into your life, into your practice, into your words, into what you share, into your sharing, into your creating. And so astrology is absolutely a divine practice in the right hands. It's absolutely a practice where you can start to translate what's happening inside and really help liberate people from their own traps, their own beliefs, their own cycles and patterns that are not yet understood, and help provide people with remedies and possibilities of practice and specialization and technique so that they can start to understand first and foremost the lies that surround who they are and reclaim the truth of what the sky encoded in its divine interpretation over their lives. And that divine interpretation is still a suggestion because you still can do things that are not specifically highlighted in your chart. There are relationships in astrology, and these relationships are not just between the heavenly bodies, the planetary bodies, the cosmic, huge cosmic bodies. They're also between your cosmic body, my cosmic body, his and her or their cosmic bodies. And what that means to me is we have to understand the relationships. So that's one of the things I'm dedicated to is understanding the relationships, helping to translate the relationships, looking at anything that is predictive as a model or an inference towards possibility, not determining someone's fate or someone's limitations based on their chart. And believe it or not, a lot of people say that's not what they do with astrology, but that is what they do with astrology. They're using it as a weapon to exert or determine a certain sense of power or powerlessness over others. And I think that's ill. I think that's really, really ill. And that anyone that you encounter that does that should really go back to the basics and back to the foundations of why or what in their chart makes them believe that they have that ability and that authority over others in such a way that it is damaging and harmful. And that's like so big for me. Like there's nothing else I can say about that. It's so big for me. So I think it's a life skill to have your own astrological understanding about the foundations in your own chart. And this is still a very complex thing. It's still a very complex science, a very complex math, a very complex rendering, understanding, education, and wisdom producing activity. So, with that being said, I hope that sheds some light. You can approach astrology like a designer, or you can approach it like a reporter. It's up to you, right? A reporter may not have some of those spiritual aspects in it, although it would be beautiful if they were there. And they may just be like forecasting the weather, forecasting the astro weather, what is happening in the cosmos, why you need to know, how it may affect you. That is definitely visible not only in the forecasting and the predictive astrology, but also in your foundational chart. What I think is beautiful is when you have a deep knowledge of the foundational chart, and then that forecasting only adds layers. It doesn't add more confusion. It doesn't produce, questions that could have been answered back here. It allows you to say, so if I know all about this from my foundational chart, then when I move to the forecasting and the prediction level of astrology, and I am saying level of astrology, then I can start to understand when someone else who has more experience, who has more mastery, is speaking to me, and I can discern if they're speaking to me from mastery or if they're speaking to me from another place because of what I know about my foundational chart. All right. So I just wanted to share that with you today. I hope this has been helpful in some way. Please drop in the comments your experiences with this. Which side or which angle do you utilize in astrology? And it's not one or the other. Remember, the first is the foundation for the second. And some people practice really, really cleanly, clearly both. They say, oh, I do the prediction because I have spent so many years, decades even, in the foundational mastery of charts. And so I'm doing this and I do it with said responsibility. Maybe drop that in a comment too, if you are a person that understands that responsibility and what it is that you've encountered that makes you feel that there are other people that should really do that. And so it's not about ability, it's not about knowledge. Like a lot of us have knowledge and ability, right? I could be doing predictive astrology. What I try to do is create only a container when it's absolutely necessary to do so. But otherwise, it's all about the spread and providing of accurate information to the best of my ability, to the best of my study and my teacher's study, to create a better relationship with the cosmos and the nature that all of us belong to and have been interacting with and engaging with since the beginning of time. So, yeah, that's it. Again, drop your comments below, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Peace.